What dark secret are you hiding from everyone? Then came the moment of reckoning. My little sister, 7 or 8 at the time, innocently asked if she could have some shrimp too. My grandmother's response sent a bolt of panic through my young heart. She had bought a large order for us to share. Faced with the prospect of getting in trouble for my selfish consumption, I made a decision that would haunt me for the next 2 decades. With the quick thinking of a guilty child, I handed my sister the package containing nothing but the discarded tails. I watched in a mixture of relief and horror as she eagerly bit into one, her face transforming from anticipation to disgust as she realized what she had just attempted to eat. That moment marked the beginning of her 20-year aversion to shrimp, a food she might have loved had it not been for my deception. For the next 20 years, I carried this guilt like a small but persistent pebble in my shoe. Every time she would turn down shrimp at family gatherings or restaurants, I felt a fresh wave of remorse for potentially robbing her of a culinary joy. When we were both in our late 20s, she finally decided to give shrimp another chance, and discovered she loved it. That's when I finally confessed, tears welling up as I explained my childhood duplicity. To my surprise, she found the whole thing hilarious, barely able to contain her laughter at the thought that I had carried such guilt for so long over something so small. Now she lives by the ocean, enjoying fresh seafood regularly, and we've turned the infamous shrimp tail incident into a running family joke. 35 years have passed since that day, and while I still feel a tiny twinge of guilt when I think about it, it's now wrapped in the warmth of shared laughter and the knowledge that some childhood wrongs can be made right, even if it takes a few decades. Story 21. Mine might seem tame by today's standards, but it carries the weight of generational expectations and cultural constraints. I'm in my 30s now, and my conservative Christian family lives in the comfortable illusion that I'm straight, believing I've only had intimate relationships with 1 or 2 women in my life. They picture my girlfriend of 4 years as a conventional cisgender woman, fitting neatly into their traditional worldview. The reality is far more complex and colorful. I've embraced a life of sexual openness, rejecting the rigid constraints of waiting for marriage. My experiences span the full spectrum of human connection. I've shared intimate moments with women, men, transgender individuals, and crossdressers. I've explored the depths of human sexuality through threesomes and various forms of expression that would scandalize my family's Sunday dinner conversations. My girlfriend knows every facet of who I am, accepting and celebrating my complete truth. She herself is transgender, passing seamlessly as a woman in society, and I support her journey unconditionally. We've made a conscious choice not to share this aspect of her identity with my family, not out of shame, but out of respect for her privacy and her desire to live authentically as the woman she is, without the complications that such knowledge might bring. To everyone else in our lives, she is simply a woman, period. That's her truth, and that's how she chooses to be known. The complexity of her journey is her story to tell or keep private as she sees fit. If the truth ever emerged, I would stand beside her without hesitation, ready to face any opposition, even if it meant cutting ties with family members who couldn't accept us. This isn't about living a lie. It's about choosing which truths are ours to share and which are simply none of anyone else's business. My family's assumptions about my sexual history and my girlfriend's background don't need correction because they're not entitled to that information. Their beliefs about me stem from their own limited worldview, and I've learned that sometimes keeping the peace means letting them maintain their comfortable illusions. In the end, what matters is the authentic life we've built together, the love we share, and the truth we know about ourselves. If that truth ever needs to be defended, we'll face it together, but until then, we're content letting others see what they choose to see. Story 22. My family and friends believe I enlisted in 2003 driven by patriotic fervor, but the truth is far darker. Years earlier, when I was 19, I experienced a trauma that would alter the course of my life. I was raped. While some people know about this violation, they don't know its full horror. He filmed it. The nightmare didn't end there. He used the recording as leverage, promising to give me the tape if I returned to his house. When I did, everything was staged again, the blankets, the camera, the trap. He raped me a second time, and when I begged for the recording, he revealed his cruel truth. He'd already sold it online. The shame and violation burrowed deep into my soul, poisoning my ability to trust. My father doesn't know the real reason I dropped out of college, a decision that fractured our relationship. He was furious about the wasted tuition, but how could I explain that I fled campus after spotting my rapist walking between classes? That day, I ran to my car, dissolved into tears, and withdrew from every course, my education becoming another casualty of my trauma. Years later, I joined the military with a secret death wish, expecting, perhaps hoping, to die in Iraq. I volunteered for every dangerous assignment, setting my own expiration date at 26. Coming home became torture because I had no motivation to live beyond my missions. I maintained my distance from others, unable to trust being alone with anyone, channeling all my energy into being the perfect soldier. Ironically, my decade in uniform became my salvation. The risk, the structure, the ability to exist without thinking about my future. It provided a strange comfort. The military gave me purpose when I had none, danger when I craved it, and structure when my world was chaos. Eventually, medical retirement forced me to leave that sanctuary. Now I'm in therapy, slowly unpacking the layers of trauma that led me to seek death in service of my country. I doubt I'll ever tell my family the complete story. How could I explain that their patriotic daughter was really just seeking an honorable way to die? Even now, I struggle to envision a future for myself. The military provided a purpose-driven escape from my trauma, but civilian life forces me to face the shadows I've been running from. Each therapy session is another step toward healing, but the road ahead seems endless. The tape might be lost to the dark corners of the internet, but its ghost still haunts my attempts to build a normal life. Story 23. 11 years ago, my cousin and I stumbled upon something that would forever alter our understanding of mortality. Deep in the fields of my grandparents' farm, beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient tree, we discovered a dead body. The man was a stranger to us, dressed in a black shirt and brown pants, his feet eerily bare. His skin had taken on the sickly greenish-gray hue of death, his body swollen and distorted, with flies creating a macabre dance around his form. By our estimation, he had been there for about a day. In that moment, frozen between childhood and the harsh reality of death, we made a decision that would bind us together in silence for over a decade. Instead of running for help, instead of alerting the authorities like rational people would, we chose to handle it ourselves. Perhaps it was the arrogance of youth, or maybe a misguided desire to protect our small world from the chaos this discovery would bring. My cousin ran to fetch a shovel while I maintained a solitary vigil with the dead, standing guard over a stranger whose story we would never know. When he returned, we dug a grave and buried the man, even saying a prayer over his makeshift resting place. Children playing at adult responsibilities we weren't prepared to understand. Our next actions reflected the strange mixture of childhood innocence and grim reality we found ourselves navigating. We decided to play detective, searching the area for clues about who this man might have been or how he met his end. We found nothing unusual, and only then did we begin to regret our hasty burial, realizing we might have destroyed evidence of foul play. Initially, we planned to confess our discovery to our family, but we decided to wait and see if any reports of missing persons surfaced, if anyone would come looking for this mysterious man. We made discreet inquiries among the workers and villagers, carefully asking if anyone had seen someone matching his description. No one had. Years passed, and the silence grew heavier. No missing person reports ever emerged, no mention of a body was ever made. We became bound by our secret, partly because we were too deep in our deception, partly because we feared the consequences of our actions. To this day, we still visit his grave whenever we return to the farm, maintaining our vigil over this stranger's final resting place. The location remains hidden, known only to my cousin and me, tucked away in a secluded spot that nature has slowly reclaimed. Even now, we occasionally search for clues about who he might have been, carrying the weight of this mystery into our adult lives. I'm sharing this story anonymously, careful to obscure any details that might reveal the location, because even after all these years, we feel a strange responsibility to protect both our secret and the sanctity of his final resting place. Story 24. I harbor a secret that grows heavier with each passing day. I'm deeply, irrevocably in love with my best friend. This isn't the fleeting crush of adolescence or the comfortable affection of long-term friendship. It's a love that has taken root in my soul, growing stronger and more complex with every shared laugh, every casual touch, every moment we spend together. We've been friends for what feels like forever, our lives intertwined in countless ways. During our time together, I found myself studying their face when they're not looking, memorizing the way their eyes crinkle at the corners when they smile, the particular cadence of their laugh, the way they run their fingers through their hair when they're deep in thought. Every gesture, every expression has become precious to me, stored away in a mental archive of unrequited longing. Sometimes when we're hanging out, I catch myself staring, wondering what it would be like if we were together. I've constructed elaborate daydreams about our life as a couple. The morning coffee we'd share, the quiet evenings spent reading side by side, the adventures we'd embark on together. But then reality crashes in like a cold wave, reminding me that they're happily involved with someone else. I would never try to break them up. Their happiness means too much to me, even if it comes at the cost of my own. So I keep my feelings locked away, playing the role of the supportive best friend while my heart aches in silence. The irony is that they're the person I would normally turn to for advice about matters of the heart, but in this case, they're the one person I can't confide in. Sometimes I think I should tell them the truth, lay my cards on the table, and let the chips fall where they may. But the thought of losing our friendship, of making things awkward between us, terrifies me more than the pain of keeping this secret. What if they can't forgive me for harboring these feelings? What if my confession destroys the easy comfort we've built over years of friendship? I feel stuck in an emotional limbo, unable to move forward or let go. I know I need to find the courage to either confess my feelings or find a way to truly release them. But for now, I remain trapped in this bittersweet space between friendship and longing, wondering if the risk of losing them completely is worth the chance at something more. Story 25. I no longer carry a dark secret, but 4 years ago, I was crushed beneath the weight of one that nearly destroyed everything I held dear. After being laid off from a job I loved, my financial world began to unravel with frightening speed. Within 2 months, I had maxed out my credit cards and found myself trapped in the quicksand of payday loans, watching helplessly as my financial stability crumbled around me. For 3 excruciating years, almost every penny of my paycheck was devoured by interest payments, leaving nothing for building a future or even enjoying the present. The payday loans became a voracious monster, consuming my financial life with interest rates that seemed to multiply like cancer cells. What made it even worse was that I was hiding all of this from my wife, convinced she would leave me if she discovered the truth. The shadow of my father's financial irresponsibility loomed large over my decisions. He had accumulated debt without remorse, watching it grow like a poisonous garden while showing no concern for the consequences. I, on the other hand, was being eaten alive by anxiety. The stress manifested physically. I would often find myself vomiting from the sheer panic of our precarious financial situation, yet still couldn't bring myself to confess to my wife. The truth finally exploded into the open when a debt collector, operating outside the bounds of legality, somehow obtained my wife's phone number and called her looking for me. Her confusion in that moment was like a knife to my heart, and I had no choice but to finally reveal everything. I'm still working through a consumer proposal to manage the debt, but to my amazement, my wife didn't leave. Though rebuilding her trust has been a long and challenging journey, we're still together. Looking back, I can see how foolish I was not to be honest from the beginning. The fear of admitting my financial failures made everything exponentially worse. At the lowest point, 88% of my paycheck was being sacrificed to the altar of interest payments, forcing me to sell personal possessions just to keep a roof over our heads. I learned the hard way that if your partner truly loves you, they'd rather face financial challenges together than discover you've been fighting them alone. Don't repeat my mistakes. If you find yourself drowning in debt, be honest before the situation spirals beyond control. The weight of financial secrets can crush not only your bank account, but also your soul, your relationships, and your sense of self-worth. The path to recovery begins with truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Story 26. 7 years ago, I orchestrated the expulsion of my bully and 6 other tormentors from our high school boarding school, a victory that still fills me with a complex mixture of satisfaction and guilt. There was this one student in my class who had made it his mission to transform my life into a living hell. He had no legitimate reason to target me, but he wielded his popularity like a weapon, turning every day into an exercise in survival. The worst part wasn't just his direct attacks. It was the way no one ever stood up for me when I tried to defend myself. His status as one of the cool kids made him virtually untouchable, while I remained an easy target. The breaking point came one night when I discovered my door was locked from the inside. Through the window, I witnessed him and 6 other popular boys beating my roommate mercilessly, while a crowd of at least a dozen students watched the scene unfold as if it were entertainment. I could have intervened, could have tried to stop the violence, but fear and self-preservation kept me rooted in place. The next morning, I learned my roommate had no intention of reporting the attack to the school administration. But when the 7 boys managed to rally the entire class to agree on a fabricated story to protect them, I saw my opportunity for revenge. They even held a meeting to coordinate their cover story. That's when I realized their popularity had made them careless, overconfident. While they were busy constructing their lies, I went straight to the counselor and told the unvarnished truth about what had happened, including details about how they had organized their collective alibi. When the disciplinary board questioned them, their carefully constructed lies crumbled spectacularly. By the end of the week, all 7 boys were expelled, forced to leave the school in disgrace. The student body was in shock, crying and upset because some of the most popular kids had to go. They even organized a farewell party for them. I attended, playing my part, pretending to share in the collective sadness while internally celebrating their downfall. I've never felt happier watching someone's world collapse. Last I heard, my primary tormentor is still struggling in a vocational college, his dreams of academic success shattered by his own cruelty. Wherever you are, I hope you suffer slowly, understanding that your actions have consequences, that popularity doesn't grant immunity from justice. Some might call it petty or vindictive to take such pleasure in another's downfall, but those people have never experienced the daily psychological torture of being powerless against someone who enjoys causing pain. Sometimes justice wears a mask of revenge, and I've made peace with my role in delivering both. Story 1. For over a decade, I've been wrestling with an eating disorder that ebbs and flows like a relentless tide. Deep down, I recognize its destructive nature, yet there's this toxic part of me that finds an almost euphoric satisfaction in the emptiness. Several years ago, things spiraled to their darkest point. I reached my lowest weight ever, struggling through each day in a haze of brain fog and labored breathing. When I finally attempted to nourish myself again, even the smallest morsel would cause my stomach to revolt, bloating severely. Over the past year, as the numbers on the scale have crept upward, my depression and anxiety have intensified their grip on my psyche. My family believes I'm avoiding them out of disinterest, but the truth cuts deeper. The mere thought of trying on clothes or being seen in public fills me with such overwhelming dread that I've chosen self-imposed isolation as a shield. It's been easier to retreat into solitude than face the crushing weight of existence. Now, I can feel myself being pulled back into the gravitational field of my old disordered eating patterns, like a planet unable to escape its destructive orbit. Story 2. A decade ago, my life changed forever when terror invaded my sanctuary. What began as an innocent knock on my door transformed into a nightmare as a mountain of muscle claiming to be ex-Navy, forced his way into my home. His eyes were wild with intoxication, his bloodied hand clutching a jagged bottle like a primitive weapon. His rambling about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse sent chills down my spine as he attempted to extort me, threatening death at the hands of his self-proclaimed Brothers of Doom if I didn't pay for protection. My heart thundered in my chest as I commanded him to leave, but my words fell on deaf ears. As his aggression escalated, desperation forced me to bluff. I threatened to blow his brains out, despite not owning a gun. When he called my bluff, primal survival instincts took over. I bolted to the kitchen, seized a knife, and slashed at him repeatedly until he finally staggered out into the night, leaving a trail of crimson in his wake. Days later, a neighbor's casual mention of a dead man found in the area with suspicious arm wounds made my blood run cold. The pieces fell into place. He must have succumbed to the wounds I inflicted. Strangely, in my rough neighborhood where law enforcement turned a blind eye, no questions were ever asked about the blood staining my property. The man, I learned, had a history of violent crimes. I had taken a life, albeit indirectly, and this secret has become my eternal burden to bear alone. Story 3. In my youth, I lived under my grandmother's nurturing wing. Shortly after I turned 18, her health began to slip away like sand through an hourglass. The signs were unmistakable. She was approaching her final chapter. For months, I devoted myself to her care, coordinating hospital visits and managing what I could within my limited capabilities. We had a professional caregiver who visited daily, handling the more challenging aspects of her care that lay beyond my expertise. What my family doesn't know, what haunts me still, is the choice I made on that fateful night. I was in the living room, the blue glow of the television washing over me, when I heard my dog's distressed whimpers and barks from my grandmother's room. In that moment, I knew exactly what was happening. I knew that if I moved quickly, if I called for help, there might have been a chance to save her. But I made a conscious decision, a choice that would forever weigh on my conscience. I chose not to intervene. I couldn't bear to watch her suffer any longer, to see her trapped in a body that had become her prison, unable to care for herself and racked with constant pain. So I let her go, waiting until I was certain before calling anyone. She lived a full 92 years, but my only regret stems from my own foolish choices. She passed away just 1 month after I would have graduated had I not been expelled from school. She had been well enough then to attend my graduation, and I carry the burden of those poor decisions that robbed us both of that precious moment. Story 4. This isn't my secret to tell, but rather my mother's, a tale of love, loss, and sacrifice that I've kept hidden from the one person it would affect most profoundly. In the vibrant backdrop of the 1960s, my mother found herself deeply in love with a young man named Jimmy. They were each other's first loves, their relationship blossoming through their high school years as they dreamed of a shared future. When Jimmy left for college, my mother stayed behind, but their love remained strong across the distance. Then came the devastating blow. Jimmy had been unfaithful, and another girl was carrying his child. He returned home, his eyes filled with tears, explaining that with abortion being illegal at the time, he had no choice but to marry the other woman. His words cut deep as he professed his enduring love for my mother, even as he admitted his hands were tied by circumstance. But here lies the crushing irony. My mother was also carrying Jimmy's child, a secret she chose to take to her grave. In her anguish, she made a desperate decision, deliberately throwing herself down a flight of stairs to induce a miscarriage. Jimmy married the other woman, never knowing about the child that might have been. Years later, as Facebook dawned, my mother reconnected with Jimmy through my account, as she didn't have one of her own. He was still married to the same woman, just as my mother remained with my father. They exchanged messages, their words tinged with the bittersweet taste of what might have been. signing off with whispered, "I love you" that echoed across decades of separation. My mother passed away several years ago, but I remain the keeper of her secret. Jimmy will never know about the pregnancy, the miscarriage, or how differently their lives might have unfolded. It's not my story to share, so I'll carry it silently, watching as the ripples of their past choices continue to shape the present. Story 5. 2 years ago, my wife, her mother, and I purchased what seemed like an ordinary house. Through whispered conversations with neighbors, I gradually uncovered the dark history that lurked within these walls. The previous owners had a daughter who had fallen in with a dangerous crowd. Since moving in, we've experienced a series of unsettling encounters that now take on a more sinister meaning in light of what I've learned. One night, the darkness was pierced by a stranger's knock at our door. They claimed to need gas, despite our house being situated at the end of a long, secluded driveway, an unlikely destination for someone truly in need of assistance. Looking back, I suspect they were searching for the previous occupants, testing the waters of our new residence. Another morning, as the aroma of Sunday pancakes filled our kitchen, 4 sheriff's officers appeared at our doorstep. They'd received a mysterious 911 call from our address. Impossible, given we don't even have a landline. When they mentioned the previous owners' names, I explained our recent purchase, and they departed, though something in their eyes suggested they knew more than they were saying. During a casual conversation while tending to my yard work, a neighbor finally unveiled the house's haunting secret. He'd noticed the police cars and inquired about their visit. When I shared the story, his face darkened with a mix of sorrow and concern as he revealed the truth. Our home had been the scene of a killing. 2 years before our purchase, the previous owner had shot and killed his daughter's boyfriend during a heated confrontation. The boyfriend's involvement in criminal activities had sparked the father's deadly disapproval. In the aftermath of the shooting, the victim's associates had terrorized the family, slashing tires, setting off fireworks in the dead of night, and creating chaos while the wheels of justice turned slowly. The police's delayed response in pressing charges only fueled the cycle of revenge. I stood there, stunned by this revelation, suddenly understanding the strange energy that sometimes seemed to pulse through our home. "Do me a favor," I managed to say. "Don't tell my wife or mother-in-law about this. They're already uneasy about the house, and this would push them over the edge." So here I am, living in a house where a man's life was violently ended, carrying this knowledge alone. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound now carries the weight of this dark history, a secret I must keep to protect my family's peace of mind. Story 6. In high school, I was the quintessential good student, a quiet achiever who excelled academically while barely casting a shadow in the social landscape. My presence in AP classes was so understated that you might have missed me entirely if you weren't looking carefully. But there was someone who commanded attention in all the wrong ways, a boy whose very existence seemed to grate against my sense of justice. He was my polar opposite, loud, obnoxious, and perpetually dancing on the razor's edge of acceptable behavior. Somehow, he always managed to maintain just enough plausible deniability to escape serious consequences for his actions. We never exchanged a single word, and I doubt he even registered my existence, but I observed his cruelty with growing contempt. Perhaps it was the day he tormented a girl who'd forgotten her sweater on a cold morning, his eyes gleaming with malice as he repeatedly commented on her discomfort, his gaze fixed inappropriately on her chest. Or maybe it was his calculated manipulation of a likely neurodivergent classmate, befriending him just long enough to exploit him for homework help, only to turn around and make him the target of his bullying the very next day. Whatever the final straw, I decided to become an agent of karmic justice. I possessed a unique talent, the ability to produce a perfect tea kettle whistle without moving my lips noticeably. At random intervals, sometimes weekly, sometimes with unpredictable gaps between incidents, I would unleash this sonic weapon. The timing was always impeccable, the pitch identical each time. Without fail, he would be blamed. The teachers, already wary of his disruptive tendencies, would reprimand him in front of the entire class. His protests of innocence fell on deaf ears, his reputation working against him. Meanwhile, I maintained my facade of academic excellence and invisibility, the perfect cover for my subtle revenge. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become a different kind of bully, wielding psychological warfare instead of brute force. But in my mind, I was merely balancing the scales of justice, one whistle at a time. Story 7. Severing ties with my father was the most liberating decision I've ever made. I hope the uncertainty of not knowing how his only child and grandchild are faring gnaws at his soul every single day. For 8 long years, from age 10 to 18, I persistently tried to forge a relationship with him, each attempt like reaching into a flame, hoping it wouldn't burn this time. During those formative years, between ages 10 and 13, he would regularly voice his darkest wish, that I had died during my kindergarten illness. His twisted logic was that my death would have prevented me from tattling and destroying his marriage to my mother. The cruelty of his words carved deep scars into my young psyche. Despite this psychological warfare, I continued trying to maintain a connection, partly for my mother's sake and to help her financially. I even endured extended visits to his house. At 14, his abuse evolved. He would lock me in a closet for hours, leaving me alone with darkness and terror. By 16, he attempted to buy my affection, throwing money at the problem as if currency could heal emotional wounds. But by then, I was already working, finding independence and strength in my ability to support myself without his toxic assistance. To this day, I wage a daily battle against the echoes of his words, questioning my worth just as he did. But when I look at my own child, I'm struck by the impossibility of harboring such venom toward them. I cannot fathom speaking such poisonous words to a young soul, let alone acting on such thoughts. The contrast between his darkness and the light I strive to provide for my own child serves as a constant reminder of the cycle I've broken. Story 8. I harbor two secrets that would shatter my carefully constructed facade. I'm a methamphetamine addict, and I'm gay. To the outside world, I'm the epitome of success, the responsible breadwinner, reliable and composed. Even during my darkest spirals into addiction, I managed to secure promotions, earn raises, and maintain an image of unwavering competence. No one suspected the demons that danced behind my professional smile. Before the pandemic descended like a dark curtain over the world, my addiction manifested primarily through an insatiable hunger for hookups and sex. But the isolation of lockdown pushed me toward a more sinister companion, crystal meth. The descent was swift and merciless, leading me down a path of increasingly risky encounters. The consequences of my double life began to surface in the form of multiple STIs. Despite being on prep to shield myself from HIV, I contracted a parade of infections: gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, and the most humiliating of all, anal warts. The warts marked my lowest point, necessitating surgery that I endured in complete solitude, unable to share my shame with a single soul. I foolishly believed the trauma of surgery would shock me into sobriety, but addiction's grip proved stronger than my resolve. I relapsed multiple times, each fall harder than the last. The surgery left an unexpected legacy. My doctor informed me that my anal canal was permanently altered, making certain intimate acts impossible. Part of me mourns this loss, while another part views it as a twisted blessing, forcing me to abandon the most dangerous aspects of my former lifestyle. In the reflection of my computer screen at work, I sometimes catch glimpses of both versions of myself, the successful professional and the struggling addict, and wonder how long I can maintain this precarious balance before my carefully constructed world comes crashing down. Story 9. My only child, my beautiful 23-year-old son, battles the relentless demon of schizophrenia. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt 18 months ago, shattering our world into fragments we're still trying to piece together. Now that the medication has stabilized his most severe symptoms, he faces an even more crushing reality: the full understanding of the arduous path that stretches before him, a realization that breaks my heart anew each day. Though his father and I are no longer married, we've found common ground in our shared mission to support our son. We coordinate medical appointments, manage medications, and try to maintain some semblance of normalcy in his life. But despite our united front, despite every resource we can muster, our son's daily struggles pierce my soul with an almost physical pain. Here's my darkest secret, one that I've never dared voice aloud. If my son ever acted on his suicidal thoughts, a part of me would understand completely. The thought of losing him would destroy me and his father, leaving an irreparable void in our lives. But I know he would finally find the peace that eludes him in this life. This terrible understanding, this acceptance of the unthinkable, provides a strange sort of comfort, even as it fills me with guilt. He is my heart, my light, my reason for breathing, but I'm haunted by the possibility that neither medication, therapy, nor even the fiercest maternal love can ever fully vanquish the shadows that plague his mind. As his mother, this helplessness in the face of his suffering is a special kind of torture. Watching your child battle an enemy you can neither see nor fight, knowing that sometimes love isn't enough to heal the deepest wounds. Story 10. Years ago, a decision I made in a moment of moral ambiguity continues to haunt my conscience. A local drug dealer, a man whose hands were stained with the destruction of countless lives through heroin and cocaine, approached me with an unusual request. Already awaiting trial on his third offense and facing significant prison time, he asked me to safeguard a package of money. He chose me precisely because I existed outside his criminal world, and his instincts about my trustworthiness, ironically, proved correct. The package he entrusted to me contained $125,000 in crisp $100 bills. It was surprisingly compact. Wrapped tightly in rubber bands, the stack measured only 5 or 6 inches thick. Our arrangement was simple. Every week or so, he'd request $5,000, and I'd meet him somewhere to make the exchange. This dance continued for months, each transaction adding another layer to my complicity. When only $10,000 remained, fate intervened. He was caught dealing while out on bond, and this time, the system showed no mercy. His girlfriend, consumed by her own addiction, began desperately calling me, demanding the remaining money. I chose silence as my response, knowing her demands were fueled by the very substances that had led to this situation. He received a 20-year sentence, but served only 1 month before taking his own life in his cell. The final $10,000 remained in my possession, a secret I've carried like a lead weight in my conscience. Sometimes I wonder if that money was blood money, if it represented destroyed lives and shattered families. Other times, I rationalize that keeping it prevented more drugs from reaching the streets. The money is long gone now, spent on mundane things that I can barely recall, but the moral complexity of my choice continues to weigh on me. I was neither hero nor villain in this story, just a person who made a choice in a gray area of ethics, where right and wrong blur into shades of survival. Story 11. This isn't a dark secret so much as a quiet tragedy unfolding in the heart of small-town America. I live in a place where everyone knows everyone, or at least claims to. I have family, friends of various degrees, best friends, close friends, good friends, and casual acquaintances. Yet lately, I've been haunted by the growing sensation that I'm becoming invisible, fading like an old photograph left too long in the sun. They've started excluding me from gatherings, both grand and intimate. Our once vibrant group chat fell silent after a confrontation with one member, the digital equivalent of a door slowly closing. I tried to mend the rift, extended olive branches that withered untouched. Now I spend most of my days in solitude, watching life happen through the window of social media. What they don't realize is that I still see everything. My alternate account, unknown to them, gives me a front row seat to their continued happiness. Their impromptu meetups, their inside jokes, their lives moving forward without missing a beat. They don't bother hiding these moments anymore. In their minds, I've ceased to exist. The pain of witnessing their joy without me cuts deeper than any knife. Sometimes I find myself scrolling through old photos, remembering when I was part of their world, when my laughter blended with theirs. Depression has become my constant companion, wrapping around me like a familiar but unwelcome blanket. In my darkest moments, I fantasize about disappearing completely, not in any tragic sense, but simply packing up and starting fresh somewhere new. A place where no one knows me, where I wouldn't have to pretend not to see the gatherings I wasn't invited to, where every social media post wouldn't feel like a reminder of my exclusion. At least in a city of strangers, my loneliness would make sense. The saddest part isn't that they've forgotten me, it's that they've forgotten how to miss me. Story 12. Perhaps no one will read this, but the act of writing might help unburden my soul of a truth I've carried alone. In 2016, my husband's life was cut short by a devastating car accident. He was 32, I was 30, and our marriage had barely reached its second anniversary. Our relationship had been a whirlwind romance, and our brief time together was marked by turbulence rather than tranquility. Throughout my 20s, I had struggled as a single mother, scraping by on minimum wage, watching my dreams slip through my fingers like sand. But last year, something remarkable happened. I graduated with my bachelor's degree, earning high honors. I seized the opportunity to relocate to a new state, securing a position that tripled my previous income. For the first time in my life, I can choose my own path, create adventures with my child, and build the life I once thought impossible. Here's the bitter truth that gnaws at my conscience. I wouldn't be here if he had survived. If he were still alive, I'd likely be trapped in the same cycle of dependence, performing menial work or remaining a housewife, tethered to his dreams instead of pursuing my own. His death, as tragic as it was, became the key that unlocked my cage. The irony of my situation cuts deep. I now work in the industry and position he always dreamed of claiming for himself. I've achieved what he couldn't, and I've done it because of his absence. I'm not thankful for his death, but I can't pretend to miss him with the intensity that society expects of a widow. My grief is complicated by the freedom his passing unexpectedly granted me. Sometimes I wonder if this makes me a monster, finding liberation in tragedy, building my success on the foundation of his absence. But then I look at my child's brightening future, at the opportunities we now have, and I realize that perhaps this is life's strange way of turning darkness into light. Story 13. Let me be clear from the start. I'm not a danger to myself or others, and that won't change. But beyond that fundamental truth lies a more complex reality. I've reached a point where I feel I'm merely existing rather than living. For nearly 4 years, I've been locked in an endless battle with chronic pain, severe sciatica that has rendered me disabled, but not quite disabled enough to qualify for additional assistance beyond provincial healthcare. Having originally come from the United States, I recognize the blessing of having healthcare that won't bankrupt me, and that gratitude remains intact. My love for my wife and daughters runs deep and true. I want to be present for every milestone, every triumph, every setback, every ordinary moment in between. I still manage to handle most of the shopping and cooking, finding small sparks of joy in preparing meals that bring smiles to their faces. But for myself, the well of personal desires has run dry. Over the years, I've watched my ambitions and interests wither away like leaves in autumn. Reading, once my escape, now feels like an insurmountable task. New TV shows or movies overwhelm me. The mere thought of having to focus and engage seems to require energy I no longer possess. I can recognize the desire to watch them, but following through feels like trying to climb a mountain in lead boots. I've retreated into the familiar comfort of rewatching old shows and listening to the same beloved bands I've known for years. The only new content I consume is during evening TV sessions with my wife, when I carefully hoard my mental energy to share those precious moments with her. The rest of my day is an exercise in existing, breathing, moving when necessary, enduring. My wife would be heartbroken if she knew the extent of my emotional withdrawal. If there were a solution, I'd grasp it with both hands, but every possible treatment has been exhausted. My condition is degenerative. Each passing day brings me further from the person I used to be. Yet I have time, and I'm determined to use it purposefully. My goal now is to ensure I remain a net positive in my family's life rather than a drain. Though I can no longer contribute financially, I search for other ways to add value to our shared existence. Sometimes I wonder if they notice how I measure every action against its cost and pain, carefully budgeting my energy to maintain this delicate balance. Story 14. I have a son that nobody knows about, a secret shared only between his mother and me. She was more than just a good friend. She was a beacon of kindness and dedication in my life. Despite her warm heart and professional success as a teacher, society's shallow standards had labeled her as plain, and she had never experienced the romance she yearned for. As her early 40s approached, she watched her dream of motherhood slipping away with each passing year. After accepting that marriage might remain elusive, she made a bold decision to pursue motherhood on her own terms. She had meticulously saved $112,000 for artificial insemination, but fate dealt her a cruel hand when the first attempt failed. Her teacher's salary couldn't sustain multiple attempts at such an expensive procedure, and time was becoming her enemy in the race to motherhood. That's when I stepped forward, offering a solution that would change both our lives forever. Our arrangement was carefully planned. We agreed that officially, she would maintain the story of anonymous artificial insemination. We even consulted a lawyer, investing significant resources to legally absolve me of any parental responsibilities or claims. In my mind, I viewed it as a more personal version of sperm donation. Instead of contributing to an anonymous bank, I was helping someone I deeply cared about achieve her lifelong dream. The process was surprisingly simple. I would make my contribution during her fertile periods, and after just a few attempts, we succeeded where the expensive medical procedures had failed. Now she has the child she always dreamed of, while I walk through life officially childless. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in town, watching from a distance as my biological son grows and thrives, knowing I played a part in creating this happiness while remaining forever in the shadows. It's a unique kind of joy tinged with bittersweetness, being simultaneously present and absent in the story of a life I helped create. Story 15. This isn't my story to tell, but rather my close friend's tale of how a simple DNA test unraveled the carefully woven fabric of her family's history. Like many others curious about their genetic heritage and potential health predispositions, she decided to try 23andMe. When her results arrived, she noticed something intriguing: a distant relative listed in New York. Being South Asian, we're both accustomed to having extensive family trees with branches reaching far and wide, so she initially dismissed it as just another cousin in our vast diaspora. The story took an unexpected turn when she received a Facebook friend request from a man sharing her surname. His message began with words that would shake her world to its core. "Hi, I know this sounds crazy, but I think you might be my half-sister." My friend's initial reaction was pure denial, desperately trying to dismiss this stranger's claim as a mistake or a scam. But the man and his wife were persistent, reaching out through various platforms with a story that seemed too specific to be fabricated. According to him, when my friend's father first immigrated to the United States in the late 1980s, he had engaged in an affair with a woman in New York. The man claimed that her father had moved to another state before his birth, never knowing about the child he had left behind. The DNA test had been his way of confirming his father's identity, and the details he shared about my friend's father were disturbingly accurate. I encouraged her to confront her father privately with this information. While I wasn't privy to the entire conversation, I know it left her father in a state of shock so profound that he temporarily moved out of their family home. The revelation sent ripples through their family's peaceful existence, disturbing waters that had been still for decades. This happened several years ago, and on the surface, their family appears to have recovered its equilibrium. But beneath the calm exterior, I know the truth still ripples through their relationships like an underwater current. I never bring it up, respecting the delicate peace they've managed to rebuild, but I often wonder how many other families harbor similar secrets, waiting to be unveiled by the march of technology. Story 16. My daughter isn't biologically mine. A simple statement that carries the weight of a complex reality. My journey with my wife began in 2011, but our path wasn't always smooth. In 2018, I hit rock bottom, surrendering everything to the demon of addiction. She left me then, a decision I couldn't blame her for. But love, determination, and the desire for redemption drove me to fight my way back to sobriety, and eventually back to her. When she returned to my life, she carried a precious secret beneath her heart. She was pregnant. After enduring the heartbreak of 4 miscarriages together, I viewed this pregnancy as a divine blessing, a sign that life was giving us another chance. The first time I held my daughter, she was barely a week old. In that magical moment, she gave me a smile, not just any smile, but one that seemed meant only for me. In that instant, biology became irrelevant. I became her father in every way that matters. Her biological father exists as a shadow in our lives, a meth addict known for leaving a trail of pain in his wake. He doesn't know about me, though we live within 50 miles of each other in the same state. This proximity haunts me daily, fueling my desire to convince my wife to relocate somewhere far away. But she's hesitant to uproot our lives, creating a tension that simmers beneath our domestic tranquility. My daughter is approaching 4 now, standing on the threshold of understanding, soon able to call me dad, with full comprehension of what that word means. My own parents remain in the dark about her origins, and I'm particularly anxious about my father's potential reaction. The irony isn't lost on me. My own mother kept me from him for 18 years, and now I'm harboring a different kind of parental secret. Working construction in the Deep South adds another layer of complexity to our situation. In this environment, raising a child who isn't biologically yours often draws judgment and derision. Sometimes I feel the weight of others' unspoken opinions, their sideways glances carrying the burden of social stigma. But in those moments, I remember her smile, that first pure connection we shared, and I know that nothing, not biology, not society's expectations, not even my own doubts, matters more than being her father. Story 17. During my elementary school years, a friend from church invited me over to play with her extensive Barbie collection. Among her countless accessories was a tiny toy can of dog food, an insignificant item that somehow became the focus of my deepest childhood longing. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. My own Barbies didn't even have pets to feed. But that miniature can represented something far more significant than its simple plastic form suggested. To my young mind, that tiny can symbolized everything I didn't have. The stability of growing up in a permanent home where height marks on the wall told the story of years past, rather than our nomadic existence of moving from one apartment to another whenever rent increases forced us out. It represented the kind of normal, settled life that seemed to exist only in other people's homes. In a moment of desperate desire, I committed my first theft. My childish logic led me to believe that if I wrote my name on the can, my friend wouldn't recognize it as her own. After all, she had so many toys. Surely she wouldn't miss this one small piece. But when she visited my apartment later, that stolen can stood out like a sore thumb among my modest collection of cheap Barbie accessories. The incongruity was impossible to ignore. She recognized it immediately and questioned its presence. I responded with lies that crumbled under the weight of her scrutiny. That moment marked the end of our friendship, a consequence that seemed impossibly harsh for such a small transgression, yet perfectly aligned with the magnitude of betrayal it represented. Years later, our paths crossed again at a club. We shared a wonderful conversation, laughing about old times, but the words of apology for that long-ago theft remained stuck in my throat. To this day, I carry the regret of not acknowledging that childhood mistake, not for the value of the toy itself, but for the breach of trust it represented. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers that incident as vividly as I do, or if it's just another forgotten childhood squabble in her memory. But for me, it remains a powerful reminder of how desperation for normalcy can drive us to actions that ripple through our relationships in unexpected ways. Story 18. I'm drowning in a peculiar kind of loneliness, the type that makes you cry yourself to sleep even while surrounded by people. My friend group has unconsciously cast me in the role of their collective punching bag, while my customer service job subjects me to a daily barrage of negativity. Between work and friends, my existence has become a continuous stream of criticism, amplified by the relentless echo chamber of my own self-doubt. My romantic life has crumbled into dust. Every man I attempt to connect with seems to recoil from my presence, disappearing into the ether without explanation, leaving me to obsess over invisible flaws. These rejections feed into my already flourishing garden of self-loathing, each ghosting another confirmation of my perceived inadequacies. I believe I'm a decent person, reasonably attractive even, but I've become painfully aware of how uninteresting I am. Without any real hobbies or passions, my solitary hours stretch endlessly in my apartment, filled with nothing but deafening silence. The emptiness is so complete that it takes on a physical presence, like another occupant in my home. Even when I manage to escape my solitude by joining friends, seeking to absorb some of their vitality, I can't escape the role they've assigned me. Every word I speak becomes ammunition for their amusement, twisted into jokes at my expense. I've become the court jester in my own social circle, my vulnerabilities transformed into entertainment for others. Sometimes I play along, desperate for any form of laughter, even if it's at my own expense. Other times, melancholy overtakes me, which only invites more criticism. Any complaint I voice inevitably draws comparisons to a former friend who left the group under similar circumstances, though she had committed some unforgivable transgression. The mere suggestion that my feelings might mirror hers brings immediate condemnation. Despite having friends who genuinely care about my well-being, I feel profoundly isolated. I lack that special connection, that one person who chooses me first, who makes me their priority. All my friends have either partners or that one best friend they do everything with. I'm never that person, never the favorite, never the first choice. Some days, I suspect I'm only invited out to serve as the evening's entertainment, not because my presence genuinely enriches anyone's experience. While I'm not suicidal and have no desire to harm myself or others, the weight of this emotional isolation grows heavier with each passing day. I'm watching helplessly as I slowly drift away from the only people in my life, terrified of spending the rest of my existence talking to myself in an empty apartment, desperately seeking validation from the void. Story 10. From age 5 until 12, the piano was my constant companion, its ivory keys a bridge between childhood innocence and something darker I couldn't yet comprehend. When I was around 9 or 10, I began taking lessons from a married woman in her 30s who taught from her home. She was unlike any teacher I'd had before, vibrant and engaging, with an uncanny ability to translate my favorite songs into sheet music that my young fingers could master. She quickly became my favorite instructor, her enthusiasm for music seemingly infectious. But she would also be my last piano teacher, though the reason for my abrupt departure from both her tutelage and the instrument itself remains shrouded in the mists of memory. The passion that had once driven me to practice daily simply vanished, as if someone had thrown a switch in my mind. My parents, who have always been loving and supportive, become strangely evasive when I bring up this particular chapter of my childhood. They claim they can't remember her name or the circumstances that led to my discontinued lessons. Their discomfort is palpable whenever the subject arises, their eyes darting away from mine like startled birds. The mystery deepened recently when I spoke with a friend my age who, though we didn't know each other then, had also taken lessons from the same teacher. His experience mirrors mine with unsettling similarity. The same initial enthusiasm, the same sudden stop, and most disturbing of all, parents who respond with the same vague discomfort when questioned about it. There's one memory that haunts me still, a single visit to the upper floor of her house. I recall a tiny room off the staircase, distinguished by a beautiful stained glass window that had captured my childish imagination. The peculiar thing is, all the instruments and teaching materials were confined to the first floor, leaving no logical reason for my presence upstairs. My friend remembers the same room, the same window, and shares my confusion about why we would have ventured up there. These parallel experiences, these shared gaps in memory, these identical parental reactions, they all point to something darker lurking beneath the surface of those seemingly innocent piano lessons. Sometimes I wonder if it's better that these memories remain buried, like discordant notes better left unplayed. Story 20. Compared to the weight of other confessions here, mine might seem trivial, a childhood transgression involving fried shrimp and sisterly deception. But it's one of those foundational moments that shaped my understanding of guilt and responsibility, a memory that clung to me like the breading on those Long John Silver's shrimp. I was 8 or 9 when my grandparents, who had taken on the responsibility of raising my sister and me, brought home a seafood feast. With the enthusiasm only a child can muster for fast food, I claimed a package of fried shrimp and proceeded to devour them with single-minded determination, leaving nothing but a pile of golden brown tails in my wake.